Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Okay, thank you again, Alex, and let's see what Alex has cooked up has prepared for us today. Thank you, Alex, especially after what we saw in the first part about the eating and the killing. Welcome, Alex.
Well, thank you very much for bringing the herd forward and your leadership. As we see that leadership is very, very important. So I want to thank everybody for joining me on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. Unfortunately, it's not beautiful all around the world, but for all the panelists, I know, speaking on behalf of all the panelists here, I want to thank you for your efforts and making this a very important meeting at a very important time. And this is history in the making. There's no question about it. So let's enjoy the trip and understand what we're trying to achieve. This is the KAKT Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are in the advanced nanotech stage, and today's topic is Hive. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada, and it's a very happy birthday. It's August the 3rd of 2025 for the KAKT Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy this trip. As you can see, it's been a long trip. We have been doing advanced teachings going back to 2021, and we're trying to make some semblance and distill the information so that newcomers can follow along, but we don't want to leave anybody behind. But at the same time, we have to keep moving forward. And so we are trying to, shall we say, distill it. But the thing is we've been broadcasting over 11 years. And for those who don't have the willingness to give their time and attention, well, they will definitely slip by. So we're discussing the hive, and a lot of us are, shall we say, we think of bees, and you know, we're afraid of bees stinging us, but they do provide some wonderful things for us, and one of that is they show us how things work. And in the books of Marantava Kolikesh, like book number 1, he shows how the universal order of creation of matters works, the bringing together of matter, dark matter, and antimatter. And this is what we're trying to discuss. And we have to remember, we have to put it in our own words and our own understanding, because we are the ones that have to talk face to face with our friends and neighbors and people that we engage with, and see how we can navigate through this. And speaking of navigation, one of the best ways is with the structure of the light. As you can see, it can navigate between two universal matters, and so it goes from here to there, and there's a connection that is made. And so in order to make this connection, it has to be structural. And that's why we call it the structure of the light, even though I don't think you can build a house out of building blocks of light. But maybe you can, because look at the origin of the universe as shown in book number 3, where we have one that splits into two. And that two is, well, there's our universe. It's man's universe. But our sister universe seems to be so much bigger. And then when you take into account that our universe is not really our playground, because we have chosen that little tiny dot we call Earth space, and it is just kind of like a drop in the drop on the drop of an ocean. And and that's what happens when you delve in schemes that are too small. So we need to expand our thinking. And we've been trying for 389 weeks in a row through the Universal Council members with Rick Crammond hosting the One Planet, One Nation, One Race for Justice and World Peace. And that's kind of a bigger scheme, isn't it? And that's how can we as, tiny humans affect this kind of noble goal? And maybe it has something to do with the hive. Yeah, because there's a plasma rule. You see, the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. So when you look at a hive, obviously the hive is much stronger than the individual member of the hive. And then, of course, when one hive comes together with another hive, and by the plasma rule, that would also feed the weaker one. But in our understanding of things, we don't see it as a binding zone as much as we see it as a conflict point. But what is important is to understand that this binding zone is a creation of something. So the plasma rule is actually the bringing together of two fields through an inertia density manifestation. So when we talk about density, that means it's more physical. And so when we look at our planet Earth, we can see that it's very dense, and even humanity is quite dense. So the notion that this is an inertia density manifestation means that it is a product. It is a product of two fields coming together, which we call inertia. But that product is in a lower energy state, hence the density. And being in this lower energy state, it can manifest into physicality. So there we go. So now we know how the books are created and how we keep the books, right? So in the business of life, we have income and expenses, but there are authors of our existence, aren't there? And so many of us like to interpret these books and maybe intervene as a pseudo author. The point is that what is our income is gravitational, and to understand our profit, we have to minus the magnetical expense, and that equals the inertia point. So the inertia point is really the profit. And of course, the profit that we are interested in the business of life is money. And money comes and money goes. But the inertia remains because there is a binding energy, and it is self-serving. It has to be self-serving because you are at that dimension point. So we know that we were created. We know that we were able to, shall we say, progress. We were able to grow, and we were able to do things and have hopes and wishes. And yet, we have decided to do things in a different fashion from the way we arrived. And that is to say, our self-serving needs are fulfilled at the expense of others. Well, what about the others? Well, we don't care about the others, do we? Because why should we? But the others, of course, are depending on the self-serving energy binding at their dimension point. And so, of course, already they're getting depleted. So here comes the conflict point. And do they retaliate, or do they just pass it on? Or do they actually revert to the proper energy dispensation? And so that is the difference in how we look at the way it is and the way we are. We are part of the fallen angels, you could say, and that is because to understand this angular density, you have to understand that it increases the density and therefore increases the pressure, and that manifests as increased gravity. So mathematically, we could say the angular momentum equals the moment of inertia times the angular velocity. But the thing about it is, regardless, is that angular momentum is conserved. So anytime you want to evaluate that energy, you have to understand that you are just looking at a photograph in a movie reel of energy transition. And so at that one point in time, you can do your mathematics, but you have to understand that that moment is gone. So where did it go? It had to fulfill the conservation of energy. And so now we're coming to the turning point where we are understanding the source of the service of the energy providing. So we can turn back or we can turn forward. And we are at that turning point to understand this binding energy. And so we are presented with a concept of what we call the hive mind. But really, the hive mind is really nothing more than a common purpose. And so when you look at bees in a hive, you can see that they have a common purpose. And through building up this honeycomb structure, they not only create a community, but they create a hive, and they create the honey and the honeycomb, and they all work together towards the creation of the hive action. Okay, so they don't seem to fight amongst themselves. They seem to be well organized. And so we wonder what's going on with our herd mentality, and we see that our problem is that we have what's called a herd mentality, but this is almost in a derogatory fashion, isn't it? And that's unfortunate because it shouldn't be. It's something about understanding that our mentality has factors which affect it. And so the question or statement is, who awakens the people? And so we've been conditioned to understand that Big Brother is watching. There is such a thing as fear-mongering. And we see how it affects the hive of bees, or the herd of cattle, or the gaggle of geese, or an army of ants. And we would be a crowd of people, right? But it's referred to as herd mentality. And that is not very complimentary. So we seem to accept that, don't we? And we don't need to accept that anymore. Okay, so let's just get on with the program. Because one of the problems that we have, of course, is that we have been given a set of rules, herd-like rules, telling us as a herd, as a hive, what and what not to do and how to conduct ourselves. So these initial 10 commandments that were completed with an additional 14 commandments shows us how humanity should live. But that's in the humanity hive. What about the beehive? Do we have 10 commandments for the bees, or 10 commandments for the cattle, or 10 commandments for the geese? And we don't have to wonder why, because we see here that one of the commandments is thou shalt not lie. And it's particularly a thorn in my side, because I learned how to tell when people lie. And the problem at that point was that I had to pretend that I believed them. And that was awkward. But it wouldn't be as awkward if I were to confront them with my belief that they were lying, because that would absolutely morph into a conflict. So I had to pretend that I believed the lie to avoid that conflict. So that responsibility was on my shoulders. Well, the best way to avoid that situation is to avoid that situation. So once you engage with someone who is lying, well, then you govern yourself accordingly. So that doesn't help our vitality. And so what we are looking for is the vitality enhancement of our life, because we have a society that has forgotten the rules of the universe. And so we need to beef up our honey wagon, or is it the peace wagon? And obviously, the honey gives us physical energy, and the peace gives us emotional energy. And the combination of the two, well, that enhances our vitality. And that's what we're all about. Why not? What's wrong with that particular picture? Well, it's our understanding of how we travel on these highways. So we've discovered that there is a transmutation highway, but it operates at a higher energy level. And this is the key point. Generally speaking, when you're in the conflict point, you are in the lowest energy state, and that is the transmission state. And we know that because the transmission involves frequency. But there's an intermediate state we call the transition highway, which involves the carbon-14. And then, of course, that is the transition point that transitions us between the transmutation highway and the transmission highway. So we are able to go in different directions. And who does that choosing? Well, we were forced, of course, to develop the cups of life for the sake of vitality. And they were called the cups of life and not the cups of the pandemic, because they were introducing us worldwide to the nanocoding process of the monatomic science, which was enhancing the inner space emotional strength of the individuals of the humanity hive. And of course, it enhanced our emotion and enhanced their physicality. And we did this with GANS production. And then we found that the GANS created other manifestations: CO2, calcium, zinc, copper, water, and amino acid. And of course, one of the most exciting things that has happened is we've been able to create a gold GANS. And then, of course, the other one is the cup of the soul, which brings together the magnetical gravitational force fields of the emotion of the physicality cup and the soul cup, and brings them together as one track cup of the soul, which has a collective hive-like mentality, because it has its own magnetical gravitational aspect and its own soul. So all the cups are working together as a hive mind. And then, speaking of the mind, well, the mind has two sides, two hemispheres of the brain, and that also works together. So one is working with the copper GANs, which is physical, and the other is with the zinc GANs, which is mental, emotional, and the carbogen, which of course is the connection to the universe. And the bringing together of these three brings together the functionality of this hive mind, and then gives us the physicality, which, lo and behold, at the grand central station of the earth ganses, we see all the ganses of all the elements, which creates the earth hive. Isn't that interesting? So do we see a pattern here that is emerging? And of course we do. So on May the 10th of this year, 2025, we are establishing a watershed moment, because we are now in the Beyond Beijing conference, where we demonstrated the manifestation of gold, the inertia density manifestation of gold, live. And so we discovered that we don't have to dig for gold. And we already know that men are not the only gold diggers. So this is changing our point of view. And our point of view involves a thing called loosh. And loosh is something that is harvested, just like a crop, just like a herd. It's loosh harvesting, which is energy, the energy of the single mind. And so there's a conflict between the single mind intention and the hive mind intention. And that hive mind intention can be controlled through the process of loosh harvesting. But it requires the single mind intention also to be harvested. So it is once we have a universal harvesting structure that we can graduate from the single mind to the hive mind. Well, when we look at the nano alignment, that's exactly what we're doing with the nano coding process. We are aligning the field with the carbon nanocrystal structure. And so we're creating a range between a magnetical field that goes around a gravitational inertia point. And so it's a coming together of two fields to create one field. And that field is the inertia point, which in fact can become a density manifestation or a plasma manifestation. There's no rule that says it has to be one or the other. So when we're looking at the concept of the twinity, where we have the 2 points of the nanotech, and then of course we have now seen that we can go another 3 orders of magnitude into the picotech, and then when we combine everything together with two points of the star tech. And so this becomes a concept of the twinity of the nanotech. So the twinity, it only involves 2. So we have 1 and 1 is 2. So when we look at the plasma science, the interesting thing about the twinity aspect of it is that each base point, when it's above 1, can go through many orders of magnitude, from 1 up to, in this sequence, up to tera, which is 10 to the power of 12. But it can also go below 1, which is the picostate, 10 to the minus 12. And then we have many, many points in between. And so each point becomes a turning point, because that turning point is pointing to and from the magnetical gravitational force fields. And so we call that a MAGRAV conditioned. And because we have so many options, then we have multiple turning points. And so in understanding this, we have to understand that not only can we have levels of energy that is given to us in a plasmatic state, but we can also, through inertia density manifestation, create a physical state. And so we have multiple turning points in every energy level, which means if we're discussing the conservation of energy and the conservation of inertia, there are many MAGRAV energy transfer states. So we can stay, for an example, on the GAN state or the nanostate or the atomic state, or we can go from one level to the other level. And so this all depends on the susceptibility. And so each of these susceptibilities becomes a turning point. And some people say the destiny rules. Well, look who's doing the dimension building. First, you have one point, then you add a second and connect one. Then you add a third and you connect two. Then you add a fourth and you connect three. And now you have this dimension that is undifferentiated. We're just talking about a general structure. But this structure is actually like a star formation. And in that basis, we have a gravitational foundation and we have a magnetical positioning. But it's still undifferentiated, it's just a structure. And then in that process, we are able to create a plasma field at the core. And that plasma field would be differentiated because it is created from the conditions through nearness and proximity. It affects the positioning. So what is not shown here is the positioning. So that core of the star formation would be directly affected by its positioning. So when we look at this star point, as we say, the fundamental is the gravitational point, which is the coming together of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter, but we have a magnetical point. And this star is not able to be extricated from the universe. It has to be part of the universe. And as such, it is a containment of GANs, which is in fact more gravitational, and yet it is of a higher energy state. Well, how can an energy state that is higher be more gravitational, which would mean that they would be more dense? And I think it all depends on your point of view. So we look at the basic components. They're magnetical and gravitational, but they have to have a relationship. And in the process of having that relationship, the polarity of that star core comes into play. And when they come together, well, we always say that the opposite poles attract and the like poles repel. But when we're discussing polarity, we have to understand that there are two sides of the equation as laid out by the rules of the conservation of energy. So therefore, there has to be a binding point. And once that binding point is determined, then we now have some loose ends. Well, that is only from one side of the equation, isn't it? Because these loose ends are only loose because we're not seeing the other part of the structure. So where is that other part of the structure? Well, when we look at the dynamic plasma relationship and we see that there is a horizontal transmission and a vertical transition, but collectively we come with this transmutation where we have this inner core, which is the Earth space point within the Earth space field. And then we also have this field that extends beyond the physical state and expands into an area around. And so there's a field that is contained within, and there's a plasmatic field that is contained around. And that plasmatic field is very much affected and impacted through polarity. So when we are doing a core analysis, as geologists would do, they would do an assay, which is a core sample, and they cut through the various layers that we have seen. And so these are all layers of overlapping turning points because, as we know, the Earth is constantly turning. So that is a big fat turning point. But the Earth has polar pathways, such as the North Pole point of view and the South Pole point of view. But there's also an equatorial point of view. And so there are many layers to these 2 or 3 points of view. And so as we were talking about that binding point between the 2 star formations, we find that that constitutes an inertia point. That inertia point is manifested from the star cores. And that becomes a singular turning point, the gravitational inertia point. So each inertia point becomes a containment. And each point on the star then has an overlap and a connection. And it is differentiated because of that connection. So the containment establishes a foundation, and that foundation then becomes a gravitational point of view. And then, of course, the inertia point hive is also involving overlapping points, but they go through a 1-dimension or 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional or star dimensional or observer dimensional. Because in order to be an observer, you can't be in the observation. And since the universe is all encapsulating, then we have an anomaly. We, as an observer, cannot extricate ourselves from the universe to be that observer. So we have to be an observer within. And in order to be that observer, then we have to have our own 3-dimensional construct. And so that observer position becomes our inertia point, hive point. So what is the observation? Well, we have to understand that there's a concept of duality, which is 2 points, or like a tandem partnership. We understand partnership, but in plasma science, it's a twinity. And that twinity then extends to the duality of the inertia points, and each point being a hive point, or shall we say a point in the hive. So that point, however, has motion. And so that is a byproduct of the ray motion, which is creation. And since there are 2 star formations coming together to make that point, then we have 2 points of view with respect to creation. Creation has to be balanced off with decay. But there is natural creation and natural decay on the creation side, and there has to be an equal through the conservation of energy equality and natural creation, natural decay on the other side to balance this off. And then so we, as the observer, although we don't see the bounding point, we have to kind of fudge it and say, well, there is a bond, but we can't see it. And then, of course, each side is a field and it has a boundary and we can't see it, and so we have to fudge that as well. So we are basically observers and fudge making realities of our intent city. And our intent city has a range and a tension. And so within is, of course, the intention, and without is the extension. So our balance between intention and extension is the hive tension and the hive bonding, isn't it? Because many tents not only create a community, but they will create a hive. Isn't a community like a hive? And so we wonder what humanity's goals are. Well, that is to intensify and extensify what we are. And we see how the bees do that through the creation of the hive. So when we talk about the polarity and we talk about how we flip the axis, so we've all played with the top, and we know how the top in its spinning does a lot of wobbling and maybe a lot of clattering, but eventually it sets up its perpendicular spinning, so it always stands up vertically. But we can do a complete flip, and we see the same thing happens historically with the sunrise, where there's evidence of how it was reversed. And it kind of shows the impact of the physical spinning, because we can do the same thing with the top. So on that basis, it should be very easy to understand the upheaval of the earth. But it doesn't answer many questions. It just shows that there is a relationship which we see on one side, balanced off by a relationship on the other side. And that would be like a snapshot in time. But our time has a historical snapshot. And so we have the past and the present. And so we assume that the future is based on that, and that there will be no polar axis flipping. And so that is the connotation that the hive mind gives you, to say, well, if we see the star core polarity, and we see how, let's say, water can spin in a cup, and we see how there is a funneling effect, and then we see how tornadoes are created in air, and that has a funneling effect, then I think we can understand how the star formations have a funneling effect in the plasma reality. And so each of these coming together are a duality creation at a particular turning point, and that point is gravitational, because that is the binding point, isn't it? But we like to talk about that as the point of conflict. But then, how do we extend to the inertia point herding? Well, then we have to have this polar flipping back and forth, because otherwise we will never be able to bind these gravitational fields together, because they would have to have a magnetical field at the binding point. And so therefore the stars would have to align to facilitate that. And so each combination is a turning point, and the multiple combinations create multiple turning points. And so we see how herds are running in one direction, and then suddenly they turn and they go in another direction. Schools of fish do the same thing. And so we have an inertia point herding, but we have multiple turning points. And so when we look at the carbon inertia highways, as we've discussed, we see that, well, wait a second, they are part of the universe. And there's a part that is unseen. And that unseen part is also part of the universe. So then all of these turning points are part of the balancing of nature, the, shall we say, equalization. And so each of these points of equality becomes a turning point. And since we have so many points of equality, then they become multiple turning points. And they are affected by the susceptibility of the positioning within the universe. So we all know that hurricanes can be quite damaging, but we also know that in the eye of the hurricane, it can be quite calm. So if we go through the hurricane, we're going to have a lot of turbulence. But if we take the polar route, then we can exit gracefully. So the problem with the hurricane is that it is created somehow through the force fields on this planet that are energy field oriented of the physical state, which is the lowest energy state. So now we understand the commonality between what we call words, because those words are physical. The soul doesn't hear them. There's a hierarchy in the universe. No one is more equal than anyone else. And we have this false detachment, which is a concept to explain detachment in simplistic terms. And then, of course, there's the concept of the holographic universe. Well, if we look at words, we understand that the words are a replacement for images, sensations, thoughts. Say, for instance, if I say car, an image will come into your mind. But I didn't say what color of car, I didn't say the brand name, I didn't even tell you how many wheels on this car. And then there are sensations. So how you feeling today? I'm feeling pretty good. All right. Well, what does good mean? Well, for some, being able to wake up in the morning means that's pretty good. And then there are thoughts. What are you thinking? How do you explain that in words? So words are susceptible to lies. And lies, of course, respond to words. But truth responds to intention. And so if you can tell the difference, well, then you are on the road to figuring out how things are going to work. And of course, hierarchy involves kingship or religiosity, an ideology, a caste system. And what is it all? It's an inertia vibratory level. And it happens to be the lowest hive energy state. Because there are leaders and there are followers. But who leads the leaders? So we have false detachment. What we say, it's divided, it's disconnected, or it could be exhausted. It results in energy draining, or it's mired in perpetual ignorance. All this tend to muddy the waters. So the holographic universe seems to want to divide us or make us into fragments, weaken us and confuse and confront. And of course, the holographic universe is really just a grand illusion, isn't it? Because it's structured by the light that you can see. So our residency, if it's only focused on that light, is only one part of the equation. But our residency involves a location. It involves an energy state. It involves tracking that energy or filtering out energy that is not wanted. So we can have these foundational rotating bases, and that becomes our turning point. But our point of view then can go in both directions, not just one direction. We have a star formation where it comes to a point, but we have another polarity that we have to take into account. So that becomes the duality. And then once we take these dualities into consideration, then we have multiple turning points. But there are no 2 points that are the same. So the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. That's the plasma rule. And if you understand that rule, then you become the benefactor of that. And so it involves the body integration, where we could become self-sufficient. So we like to have these components of the body, mind, and the energy. And as we saw in the 600 Knowledge Seekers workshop, the true image of our integration in our self-sufficiency. We're at the core, in the center. We were able to come together as a pseudo hive, if you will, which basically emptied out the fields of the separation, which were on the upper limit, the soul, and the lower limit, the soul of the body. And in the center, which was the hive mind. And it was strong, it was united, it was focused, and it was sovereign. So that is because we gave our attention to it. So there's unity within the community. It's an inner space unity. So we have this mental and physical bonding, this soul and consciousness bonding, energy and intention bonding. How are you going to play the game? You know, what is going to be your inertia bonding? Is it going to be complete? Is it going to be conscious? Are you a free being? What is your intention? Are you declaring sovereignty? So that you become the singular part of the hive. Well, what if every singular part of the hive were able to do that? Well, why not? Because the knowing is actually by connection. And that connection doesn't have to be side by side. So there are bees that leave the hive and they are still connected contiguously. So there is a universal connection. And that is the art of dreaming and the magic of the plasma dilution technology. But it's not a dream, it's a reality. That connection is real. And each of us has this connection, which is why we don't operate as a hive, but we seem to operate as a herd, and that is in a less than complementary fashion. So we have a supergranular layer around our brain, and this is the soul crossover point that crosses over from our physical reality with the universal reality. And so this is how we have our points of view as they come together, and our mind becomes the plasmagen receiver. So we have the outbound feedback and the outbound perception. But we have this supergranular layer, which also allows us to receive plasmatically from source. And so we crossed that watershed on October the 14th of 2021, which is why we reference this, okay? Because this supergranular layer allowed us to cross over from where? from the universal community to our individual soul unity. And we call that heaven transcendence, the coming together of the hemispheres of our brain that allow us the soul positioning. And so our soul is positioned at the crossroads where we have this inertia feeding vision, and it creates a plasmatic symbiosis with everything else that is out there. And so that's how we maintain our position of the hive mind. So each of us has a mind, and each of us is part of it collectively of the hive. What is the purpose of that hive? That becomes foundational, because when you have a common purpose, then you have that common activity. So you have this binding action. So is that binding action of mobilizing armies to kill other armies, or is it a mobilizing action to bring peace and prosperity to this planet? And do we have a choice in that regard? Well, didn't we discuss polar flipping? All that has to do is with the negative positive junction. So the negative is the bringing together the three dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis. So that becomes your fundamental transition matter. And then there's another track where you bring the X, Y, and Z axis together to create the positive transition matter. So each one is only one component of the two, and when they come together, that becomes your NP junction, your negative positive junction of a transfer state. But that transfer state could be a singular point, or it could be a point in the hive, or it could be the collective of the hive, or it could be the collective of the hive mind. So we're all in a progression from that nano point, and we progress towards density. And then we have this pico point, which is highly gravitational. We are discussing the advanced nanotech. And so then there's a Gens point towards the gaseousness. And so we're going from the density of the hardness to the less dense of the gaseousness. And that becomes the plasma point, which is highly magnetical. So that progression is power drawing the gravitational intensity, or the power providing the magnetical out intensity. It's a two-way street. And that is how we balance out the conservation of energy, the conservation of the maggraph. So each and every point is a magnetical gravitational balance part. And that is how the laws of conservation of energy operate. And so that energy is portable. In other words, we could have an energy state transition. So if we're talking about elevation, then the physical matter state can migrate to the energy state. And if we're talking about inertia, then the energy state can migrate to the physical matter state. So the difference, of course, is that elevation involves expansion. And we have mastered these technologies. So if we understand that inertia product is the bringing together of the pH transition of our universal existence on this planet, but that is the coming together of various components of energy portability that can be portable within a range, or it can go from range to range, or even from state to state. And so there are many different potentiation layers. And just as water splitting always totals 14, we can change the transition state by changing the y-axis density due to the causticity. So we can create unstable energy transition states, and we can alter our position. And even hydrogen does the same thing, and it does this through polar flipping, because hydrogen is not just hydrogen. The molecules of the hydrogen work with covalent bonds. And so we can have the like poles or we can have opposite poles. And yes, they are still in balance. But the net product is an inertia point. Either it's an orthohydrogen or a parahydrogen. And so if that is true, then we understand how the periodic table of the switchboards of the Earth space range details are manifest. That's why we have all these different elements. They are all at different positions and at different densities. So, as we say, with respect to the polarity, it's an elevation through causticity, or it's an inertia through maggrav positioning. And there are many, many, many potential plasma layers. And so it's the nuclear feeding inertia, which is exemplified by the fragments of the complexity. Regardless if it's a fragment, one of the hive, or the whole hive, there's a gravitational stability and there's a dimensional portability. And each and every one becomes a dimension point. And so we see with the maggrav positioning that we have the antimatter, dark matter, and matter state. So each one coming together, 1 + 1 + 1, is more than 3 because we end up with this nuclear feeding inertia. And so the key word is feeding. And so that feeding comes along maggrav pathways. So we have the force fields of attraction we call gravity, and it's gravitational intensity, and which is part of the feedback. And then we have repulsion, which is the magnetical outtensity, which is part of the feeding. Scientifically, we call it the difference between the electron and the neutron. I'm sure you can all see the difference here. So when we look at the undifferentiated beginning, we are sure that the neutron came before the atom and the PM tick. So the atom is a combination of the electron and the proton, and so that came out, but there was a difference in the energy because mathematically it did not jive with the conservation of energy equations. So we say, well, it came from the darkness. Where's that darkness? Oh, obviously it's within. And so when it came out, and we say, let there be light, then it came from without. But these are the rules of principal matter, the PM ticks, which are magnetical and traversing the entire universe and looking for that base. The coming together of the plasma-gen conversion, the combination of the antimatter, dark matter, and matter-gen in its gravitational maggrav condition. And in order to manifest in that position, it has to have a field interaction with another maggrav. So these two magravs interacting create an inertia field. And that inertia field may or may not be in the plasmatic state or the physical state, but it has to be in the plasmatic state first. And so no two plasma fields are equal in terms of field strength, but they are equal in terms of following the rules, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And when you have that balance, then you have the beginning of the creation of that maggrav. So you now create this dimension point when you have this balance between the magnetical and the gravitational fields. And then you have this dimension point at its core. And that is the seed of the creation of the matter plasma dimension. As we said, the gravitational is physical because you can touch it and you can see it, but the magnetical is plasmatic because you can't touch it or you can't see it, but it's still part of the matter plasma because in order to have the physicality, it has to be substantiated by the plasmatic fields. So that plasmatic field is part of the matter plasma, but the foundation has gone to a higher energy state where we don't have to depend on that nearness and proximity to the physical state. We can work exclusively in the plasmatic state. However, we as humanity have a special skill, and that skill is exemplified by hydrogen, which has its own gravitational conformation. We see this emission spectrum. It's unique. It's a fingerprint. It's light, and it applies to hydrogen. Then we have oxygen, which also has a gravitational conformation, and it has a unique fingerprint that is manifest as light, and it too is unique. So each of these fingerprints and each of these unique points becomes a seed point, and from there, the dimensions can expand and take into a star formation, and then from there expand. And then we have the dimensional star formation, where we have all of these maggrav points of singularity working together to create a dimension point at the core. But that dimension point cannot be extricated from the rest of the universe. It is part and parcel of the universe. All this is we're saying is how the magnetical gravitational relationship exists. And so we have taken that and shown how we can create a peace dome reactor, which is giving us a shielding. That too becomes a dimension point. On a star positioning, which becomes a dimension point, and the possession, which becomes a dimension point. And that possession on May the 10th was gold, because the gold was created from multiple turning points. We were converting dimensional gold seed points. And so each gold seed was a show of singularity. And this was heard around the world. Pardon the pun. So connect the dots, because we as humans are looking for practical points, practical reasons, road to self-determination or road from self-determination. We need a practical philosophy so we can have practical solutions. That is the practical currency of life. So the humanity inertia against shielding points shield us from hostiles, from aggression, from environmental harm, from fear mongering, and from emotional abuse. Yes, that's another kind of shielding that we need. So here we are in the uncharted territory where you are with the herd at the turning point. And there are many stars beyond that nano monatomic state. They're covering the range from decay to radiation. And there is an ancestral knowledge that is ingrained in our RNA, because we are the technology, we are the inertia product, and we are the image of that dimensional convergence point. So what are you tuning into? You better tune into the soul food and plug into the creator and turn on that energy and drop out of the resistance so that you can be the receiver at that inertia point. So you provide the pattern and you will get that energy. That is the point, the greater oneness. So here we are, 601 knowledge seeker workshops in a row over 11 years, suddenly transcending the limitations of nuclear science. So we are assembling the first Kesh space plasma research teams, because 2 months ago, on May the 10th, 2025, we were producing gold, as much as you want. by the tons, the same way Earth produces it. So it's time for a technology release because our beds are burning. It's hard to sleep when that happens. So we need a scientific rescue, a financial rescue, a political rescue, a preservation rescue. And that is first and foremost on the hive mind, is it not? And so here we are, still working on the evolution of the transmutation program, and our testing continues from August to October. So you feel free to join these sessions and enjoy these historical transmissions, because our mission is to bring peace on earth and to join humanity with the universal community. We want to bring man as equal to all the beings in the universe by teaching the plasma science and technology equally to everyone, that no one is left out and no one is abused due to the lack of knowledge. Yeah, help us achieve this goal, because that is the goal of the Hive, and you are part of it. This is Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers of the Carbon Nation, learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. There is a world peace treaty. Choose it, sign it, but mean it sincerely. The point of the true nanotech is to cross atomic boundaries. The peace dome of outer space can be your guiding beacon. Is the inertia of the present governed by dimensions of history? Well, of course it is. But is it time to learn the history of self in a universal context? Because a peaceful self can explore many inertial levels as a superconductor. The hive is the dominant emotional commonality between our belief and our experience. So this is why plasma science is continued to be delivered daily by the Peace Dome in a practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. Well, I certainly hope you all enjoyed this trip, and thank you for participating.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. You trying to make a bee out of me with all this talk about hives and hive mentality and other dimensions like that? But yesterday when I saw the local beekeeper, actually I saw some hives set up on somebody's property, and I went over there and I said to the guy, "Oh, you're selling honey?" He said, "No, I just let somebody keep their hives." So he gave me the address, and I met the beekeeper and in another town. And I thought for sure, I was thinking, wow, Gianni has showed us so many things with bees. And so I started to tell him, what the plasma can do for the bees and the hives, and the plasma water on top. And he said, plasma can't do anything for the bees. So I was a little bit shot down, not really, but I said, okay, he's not ready to hear this. And then of course when I went to see this lady next door, my trees are hanging over my fence and onto her property, so I told her we were going to cut some of those trees. And I started to talk to her, as you said, we have to talk to our neighbors about plasma. And so when I started talking about the food, and she said, "Oh," and I mentioned this early, "don't talk to me about food and not eating. I love to eat," she said. So I said, "Is it better that we approach this on the instead of dealing with the soul of physicality, to deal with the soul of the man and not really say much unless they bring up the interest in plasma, at least initially?" Because I thought, gee, I'm going to share some interesting information. And, they both didn't seem to have the strength to pick it up. So I said, maybe I should just be conveying to them without the physicality or the doorman and go right to the boss, But it's just our nature to want to talk to our neighbors about the technology. And maybe we did set a seed. But should we go to the right to the general instead of trying to argue with the soul of physicality in these situations? The same with our family, I would think.
Well, obviously, you have to introduce the conversation and offer. And then once you start to get the acceptance, then you can go further. But if you get the abuse, then you have to shield yourself. That's all. The point of the matter is that you are offering and extending, shall we say, extensifying what we are. And they have to accept it. It's up to them to choose.
And again, this is not unique. I'm sure we've all experienced this.
Oh my God. It is a family divider. It is really sad to see. Well, one case I have extremely is the woman of the household is in direct opposition with the man of the household and the kids. Well, how lonely can you be within your family?
Yes, some people do need to see it on television or on CNN or on Fox or somewhere else, but that'll come, I'm sure, in the future. Let's see if any of the participants would like to ask a question. Thank you again for your presentation, Alex. Short and sweet, but very deep as well.
Hello, Mark, and hello, Alex, and everybody.
Selena?
Yeah,
Hello, Selena.
yeah, hi, hi. Long time no see, no talk. Actually, what we are talking about right now, everybody's level is different. We are not in the same level, so that's why conflict happen. That is the main point. So we have to express ourselves, and if anybody accept those advice or talk or information, they will. If they don't want, that is okay too. But we have to talk. We need to talk. And actually, right now, I'm going to talk about little bit about our condition, our world, and the condition about those things. Actually, I think, do you remember a long time ago I talked about one, our neighbor came from maybe other planet or somewhere else with a spaceship, old dream. So I think this is that time. Maybe within, they're coming always they're coming, going. But right now, I think so officially they are going to show their self. So that's why everywhere is a critical condition. And our earth is changing a little bit too. And because of those things, everything looks a little bit crazy. But everything will be okay.
Yeah, that's what Mr. Kesh said in that announcement. He said everything looks upside down, but it's much closer and a lot of mayhem. But as he said, it's much closer than we realize.
Yeah, that is the thing happening right now. So I'm gonna quit right now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Selena. Anyone else want to raise a question or a thought, or Alex, something else you want to? You know, if every child is not born into poverty and nobody dies in poverty, instead of the depopulation agenda, once people realize that the children will be taken care of, the ones that have one or two may have four or five, and so on. Are we headed into a population explosion? I know Mr. Kesh said we did need more people if we were to colonize space, but I think once people realize that the children will be taken care of by the structure or the society, we certainly are reversing this depopulation sort of agenda that's been in our face for a number of years. So this is a very good thing, I think, because we do need more people on this planet. So will we have the population explosion? Because now people realize that the children will be taken care of, that they won't be in poverty. Anyone want to address that? Or is this just a natural thing that will happen? Everyone will start having more and more children, or even creating the children of Mitra, perhaps?
Well, may I? Oh, go ahead. Someone's talking.
We need more people. We need more population, but we need to make first safer place. Earth is not right now is that condition. We have to make it safe so people can feel comfortable to bring more soul, more population. I think so. That is the main point.
What a blessing and what a gift from the Kesh Foundation that many people who just struggle for food and energy, that is going to be taken out of the equation. And of course, the natural progression will be to have more children, I would think.
And that's a very interesting comment that Selena made, because that was exactly the comment that I was going to make. So I think this is an example of the hive mind at work. I'd like to give you another example why this is so important, is because one of the reasons I was delayed with the start here is because my partner was getting abused and I had to deal with the matter. But I was obviously part of the host of this program, and so I just took a quick look just to make sure that all things were safe. And it was at that moment, I wasn't called, I just decided to double check. And I did that at the correct time. And I dealt with the situation. And that's, you have to wonder, I didn't hear any alarm bells, and there was no call for help.
Physically.
Right. So let me just say that that would be another testimonial of the plasma communication.
Again, what we saw, anyone else would like to raise a point here or a question or a comment? Feel free. No one's going to abuse you for any reason. When he says we created the energy of gold from the matter state energy, what does that mean if you can show those reactors? He said we created the energy of gold from the matter state of the energy. What part is the matter state of the energy? I'm thinking what's in those reactors, right? So this was not a plasmatic field totally interaction. It was using the energy of the matter state to create the energy of the gold, correct? It's what was in those reactors, those spinning reactors. I think you showed a picture of that, Alex. Is that what he means by creating the energy of gold from the energy of the matter state?
Mark, I'm so grateful that you don't mind stepping in the mud,
Oh,
because
I'm not afraid to make mistakes at all.
exactly, and this is very important. So it's a compliment, okay? Because you're only looking at half the picture when you say that.
Okay?
See, the thing is that we can physically create gold by wounding the surface of the earth and extracting it from the earth. But basically, we weren't the creators of it, we were just the miners of it. So the earth actually created it. And the reason the earth created it was because of the establishment of a gravitational field, a binding field. And that's what those reactors were. They were a manifestation of that binding field. So the field energy was elevated by an inertia field, but of a higher energy. This is called elevation. At that point, you are now engaging the same rules of engagement, if you will, as the Earth is engaging in the creation of the gold, because the inertia field feeding system, the nuclear inertia feeding system, is coming from the universe. So by creating that inertia point, which is gravitational, you have suddenly engaged with or activated that inertia feeding energy. You see, so by elevating, you are now creating a different nearness and proximity. And so you are actually transferring the point of transition from a lower, very stable gravitational point and elevating it to a higher transition point. And now you are engaged between the transmutation and the transmission, if you will. So the transmission is your physical manifestation, and the transmutation is the drawing in of energy from the universe, which is abundant all over the place. That energy, in order to differentiate, must have a relationship. So the GANS reactors that you are talking about in Beijing were the establishment of that relationship. Back to you, Mark.
So is this transmutation and transfer?
Oh, definitely. It's the two fields dynamically operating, and you can't see it. So let's add one more component. So to answer your question, which is a very good follow-up question, why was the manifestation a black powder? Because it was incomplete. It was undifferentiated. It was in the transition state. What is that black powder? It's the carbon-14. But that carbon-14 did not manifest into a carbon. Okay, and it did not manifest into a nanocoating. It required more energy. Who gave that energy? Everybody stuck their finger in it the same way that you manipulate your cell phone. Okay, you touch the screen or your debit card. You don't even touch the machine. You just come within nearness and proximity, and there's an energy exchange. Well, this is what happened when you, as a plasma being, exchange energy with that black powder, which was undifferentiated. You were the deciding factor. And that's why that equipment was obsolete, because it was a preparatory stage. Where are we now? 2 years later, we are in the completed product. It goes directly from that transition stage to the transmission stage, which is the inertia manifestation in the density. And that can be predicted through our skill. So that was a demonstration that our skill is in our hands. It isn't pie in the sky. It isn't foo-foo science. And it isn't a YouTube clickbait. It is real. It was shown.
Not pseudoscience.
People touched it. People participated in it. Those were not paid actors. This is the difference. So when you're looking at this bonding, okay, it's a bonding between the energy and the intention. So the energy of the universe is abundant, but is undifferentiated. How can it differentiate it if it doesn't have a relationship with an intention? So the intention was gold production, so the field was created to allow that to happen. And what was missing was that energy that derived that. And so all it needed was the extremely powerful energy of the human body. And that is what was the most astounding part of that experiment. You can look at it and say, wow, wasn't that fantastic? There was gold production. But the thing is that the individual was capable of doing that. The individual. And the individual is part of the hive, cannot be extricated from that. So if they can do it, we can do it. And if we can do it, then everybody can do it. And then if you don't want to acknowledge it, that's not our problem. I want to thank everybody for allowing me to continue to present here because we are living in a historic time. And I just want to, again, emphasize that it really is a time to celebrate the birthday because it's not just Mr. Kesh's birthday, but I think it's all of our birthdays. We are coming to the realization point that the overall personality of the hive is to bring peace and prosperity to this planet. So thank you all for participating. And back to you, Mark. Thank you.
Alex,
Yes.
Hello.
can I make a question for you?
Sure thing.
You showed the last that picture was very beautiful. The universal and the energy that's the opposite side that we have. It's the parallel energy that we have. I was thinking of, yes, exactly. And I was thinking this week about what's my parallel energy. And for you, is the backside of us, where is for you our parallel in our related to our physical body?
It all depends on your focus. So if you're totally focused in the physicality, then your physicality is manifest through the inertia fields coming together from the soul and the solar physicality. And so your point of view is on the physical side, but you mustn't ignore the fact that that is only pertaining to your physicality. The soul and the soul of the physicality have different points of view. They don't understand words. They communicate by emotion, but the emotion of the soul and the soul of the physicality are two different emotions because the soul of physicality is an emotional interaction with the physicality, whereas the soul has an emotional interaction with the creator. So if we don't make that connection, then we limit ourselves to being on that one side. So you can focus on the physicality, but recognize that the creation of that physicality stems from the connection to the energy coming from the creator. And since you are a product, you are an inertia product of the creator, then you are the creator of that physicality. Okay, because then you become the intermediary, if you will, because you're a product of the creator. And if you become that creator, you have to understand that you never created anything bad. No one would admit to creating anything bad. You can see how people are dogmatic in their point of view. But you have to look at the consequences. So the consequences of the creator is that he created everything. Or when I say he created, the creation was created that created everything. Okay, so
Yeah.
everything he
Mhm.
created was good. It's just how you interpret it and your point of view. So if you understand that everything is good, then you have to take that responsibility. Sorry to cut you off. I take that responsibility to interpret that. Okay, so if it is good and it is good for you, then you absorb that. If it is not good for you, you shield yourself from that. And then if you want to be part and parcel of that, then that is what you give your time and attention to. You'll give your time and attention to the goodness aspect of it, and you engage in that communication capability because you do that automatically. It's not that you stop manifesting your physicality, it's just recognizing that that manifestation of that physicality is always, always on and always, always connected to the inner field strength, the nuclear feeding energy that is coming from the creator. Please carry on.
Thank you. It's because I only write here because it's easier for me to to speak. For example, my doubt is, for example, you put here C16, you put here energy and physical, C12 and C16, for example.
That's right.
And I am made from energy and I have both parts too, for example.
That's right.
I have here and here. So, but you put here like a mirror. So have another Claudia in another point of universe, for example.
That's right.
Okay. So, but this have a like an angle. This is the opposite side. Where is connected with my ancestor? Where is my opposite side? That's I was thinking about it.
Okay. The soul is the opposite side to the soul of the physicality. So if you connect to the soul of physicality, then the side you are referencing is the physical side. But the truth is that you are your soul, or the soul is you. See, the soul is your friend and will never harm you because that soul is you. So we have people who harm themselves because they're not looking at it from the soul point of view. They're looking at it from the soul of physicality. I have the power. I can hurt you, or I can hurt me, or I can be destructive, and I can choose to be so. But likewise, you can choose to work with the soul, and you can be constructive, and you can be prosperous, and you can be happy. The hive mind on this planet has been conditioned to ignore that. So we see Earth as a place of hardship. However, the truth of the matter is you did not get born on Mars, you got born on Earth space, which means that your soul made that choice. Not the soul of physicality. It cannot make that choice until you have a reference. So you made that reference purposely, directly, through the intention of the soul, that that point of reference would be Earth space. And then when you got here, you say, what a mistake I made. Well, no, because if you accept what you have with your surroundings, then you are living in history. But if you understand that just because history had a projection, and then some people say, oh, that's a prophecy, and we have to fulfill the prophecy, and then there are people who are working hard to fulfill that prophecy to determine that that prophecy is self-fulfilling. No, it is not self-fulfilling. These people who are predominant on extending history and fulfilling prophecy are the ones who are fulfilling it. The prophecy itself is not self-fulfilling. So whatever prophecy you want, you can determine that and change that. So when we talk about a paradigm shift, we talk about a generation. However, this kind of emotional feeding of the hive mind has been transgenerational. And as such, the only way that that can be fed to you is through your RNA. And your RNA cannot manifest because your RNA is manifest through the energy packs. And so those energy packs are already containing a pattern that is manifest from this transgenerational energy configuration. So that got you here, and that is part of your memory. And then when you apply that, you see, oh, Earth is a hellhole. But does it have to be that? And can you alter that? We all can alter that because we all decided to get here. The thing is, it's like cooking. Someone can cook soup and someone can cook roast beef. But someone can prepare the whole meal. So each of us has a different skill set. And maybe due to our history, we have only so much limited that we can offer. The thing is, by arriving to this planet with our intention, whether it's, shall we say, limited or abundant, however it is created, once we come into the physicality of life, then we are all equal. And so the whole purpose of life is for learning. It teaches us how things work. And sometimes the mistake is the best teacher. But if that mistake is, shall we say, final or terminal, then that becomes part of your new ancestry. And so in the next evolution of your soul evolution, if you will, your soul enhancement, that becomes your new starting point. But for those who remain, there's a possibility of having a second chance where the mistake was too close for comfort, if you will, or it moved you from your comfort zone. And you say, well, you know, if I were rational, I would have never done that. But circumstances forced me to do that. And in order to have self-preservation, you either had to make a choice, either perish or survive. And if you were able to survive, and that's an inherent choice that we all make, if we admit it or not, are we successful? And if we are successful, then that becomes a learning experience in the present state. And that will be a contribution to our genetic ancestry in another location. So each of us has to decide on that time. And we have apparently decided. And, you know, I was talking about the artistic elephants. And you say, well, gee, are elephants smart? Well, when the elephant was retired from his manual labor because of the invention of the tractor, then how does the elephant survive? Well, some elephants became artists, where the elephant keeper gave the elephant a paintbrush, put paint on the brush, and gave him a palette. And he made a picture. And it looked like, you know, a child did it and just, you know, was finger painting and it was all mishmash and everything. And you say, well, how do you know that that elephant was creating a picture? Because an elephant knows when to stop painting. And when you know when to stop painting, then that makes you an artist. Because someone who is not an artist wouldn't know when the painting is complete. We all have to make a decision. What are we doing with our time and attention right now? And when that mission is complete, then we can change our time and attention. Well, as far as knowledge seekers are concerned, and with the likes of a true Canadian patriot like Rick Crammond, 11 years is not enough time. So the intention continues. Each of us makes that choice. Back to you, Claudia.
Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes I think that I didn't want to be a human because I saw so many bad things. And what's the process?
Yeah, but of
I'm
course that's
learning.
not true, because you are human and
Yeah,
you are a beautiful contributor to peace and prosperity on this planet, and you continue to do that. So that is what you need to use as your gravitational foundation. And from there, you need to enhance your magnetical outlook and have that with extreme confidence. It's just, uh, it's your duty. And it isn't your duty in such a way that, you know, you have to salute and say, aye, aye, Captain, and like that, or that you maybe have to go into a hole and like a hermit and meditate for 5 years and then say, oh, I now see the light, I see the inspiration. Okay, so it's time for me to move my ancestral genetics. No, it is a natural process. You just accept it. So navigate through your physicality, and in the back of your mind, make sure you understand that you have a navigation in hand already that is guiding you, and that's your soul. and understand that everything that you see is a product from the deliverance from the soul. And you don't stop and say, okay, soul, engage, like Captain Kirk on the, spaceship. It's automatic. It's each and every one of us is sitting, listening on this panel, are engaged with exchanging energy from the universe, whether we want to or not. It is not something you turn on and turn off. It is something that is constant. It's just, you're referencing, saying, okay, well, my health is related to my ability to interact with the beneficiary, the beneficence of the universe, because the universe is communicating with your soul, and the soul is you, your best friend, and your soul will heal each and every part of your body simultaneously. It will do that equally, and it will do that unconditionally. So you need to progress in your physicality unconditionally. And then all the good things will happen. And to remember that even the bad things that from that point of view happen, they are contributing to your elevation. It is with that elevation that you end up being more powerful. But it's all coming from your acceptance to understand that you are a participant in this universe. You're not a slave. You're not there to be abused. You're not there to be someone's prize. You are here as a universal functionary, and God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all of you exist. Thank you.
Can I say something here?
Yeah, go
Hello.
ahead. Please
Oh.
go.
Okay. Thank you. In Bangla teaching, I sometimes say, "Oh, I am inside the God." We are inside the God, and God is in my heart. So, from my experience, I know we are everything. I seen myself in animal body, in different human body, in the cloud, in the under the ocean, and another body like our neighbor, extraterrestrial. It's not human body. So because of those experience, I know we are everything. And our soul goes everywhere. Past, present, future, everything happening together at the same time. Because I see myself in babe like a small children body and adult body, woman's body, man's body. So because of those experience, I understood we are everything. And it's not like Mr. Cash sometimes say we are like a satellite. That is true. Just like inside the brain, two neurons when touch and spark, we experience that spark position, but we are the whole brain, and we are doing everything together, everywhere. But when is the spark happen, we give that attention in there, so we see that position. But originally, whole brain is us, and we are all together. And the hive mind actually not hive mind. I feel that way I can sense everybody, everything, because my heart is open, my eyes is open. I feel others' emotion, not only human, uh, because I open my heart. I want to feel. And one funny story I will tell. I use when I cook, I um, almost go like a trance position, like meditation, deep meditated position. When I'm cooking, I'm doing everything properly, but I'm not in here. So that position, sometimes I feel somebody behind me is standing. He's, I feel that is he, not she, watching all the time. So, so when I want to see, I always see back, and then there is nothing. So suddenly I understood where my all emotion, whatever I have, he can feel, whoever it is watching me. So I decided one day I decided not to think about that, what I will do, just do by myself, not thinking, without thinking. So I did. I'm, washing dishes, and then suddenly look back. I didn't see anything, but something flew over my head, and then went to the window. I felt the air in my body, and I felt something go away, went away. So 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 that time I understood. Not only us, not only human, we all feel each other emotions, and everything is here. Um, but we don't. Maybe it is another dimension or other layer, but we can see, but we can feel. If we open our heart, we can feel, and we can feel their senses too. Our sense feel that too. Sometimes we can see with this eye, but uh, inside, if we are open our heart, we can feel and sense them. Everything is here. So I don't know. That's it.
Yeah, you do know, and thank you very much. Thanks all.
Thank you. Thank you. Listening me. I can I didn't just explain, I think so very very well, but I whatever I say, I think you understand. You
Perfect.
for
Thank you
listening.
so much. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, any other thoughts or comments anyone wants to make? I'm going to play the final disclaimer and the meeting will come to an end. But before I do that, I have a wish for all of the created things across the universe and the soul of this planet and all its inhabitants. And of course, as you understand this knowledge more, I think this little saying becomes even more pertinent. May you be proud. Here's our wish. May you be proud of the work you do. May you be proud of the person you are. And may you be proud of the difference you make. So thank you all. And we appreciate your time and being here today and sharing the knowledge as you understand it.